everyone, this is Naomi and welcome back to Naomi's Bookshelf. I am here today with my wrap up for you about August, I guess. I participated in the NEWTs and every book I read qualified for a NEWT, so I will be telling you as they come up which books were which NEWTs. But I also had a lot of fun with just reading some few classics for Classics-a-thon, and I thought it was a good reading month. I read 15 books, so we're just going to go straight into it via the NEWTs schedule of it all, so I'll tell you which ones were for which course. So the first course that I conquered was actually also for Used Bookathon, which was a readathon I participated in, reading books from used bookstores or library books or anywhere that you didn't buy from like brand new. And so for that one, I read my first book for Arithmancy, is Hickory Dickory Dock, which I picked up at my favorite used bookstore. And this is an Agatha Christie book. It's a Poirot book, and I'm not a big fan of Poirot, but that's okay. He's necessary, and I like him in some ways, but then he also is a little annoying to me. It's just personality things. But I enjoyed this one. It's about this woman who is running this like hostel boarding house kind of situation for students or for anyone who just doesn't have a place to live, so a hostel. And she is running this place, and she is the sister to Poirot's secretary, Miss Lemon. And so she is running this place, and she knows that weird things are happening, and she can't really figure out what's going on. So she talks to her sister, who talks to Poirot, and then they kind of figure out something's going on. And then in the middle of that, they discover this girl, they discover a list of items that have been stolen or missing. And of those list of items that have been stolen or missing, this girl, Celia, tells everyone that she's the one who did it. She's a kleptomaniac and she can't help herself for stealing everything. And it's like, okay, if that's really the problem. And Poirot's like, I don't think that solves all the problems, because that doesn't make sense. But that's just how it kind of worked out. And then right away, one of the philosophy students is like, oh, I'll marry you, I'll take care of you. And it's like, that's what she's always wanted. She wants to be married to him, she's in love with him. And then they announced their engagement, and the next day she's found dead. And there's kind of some confusion, especially when it's like, well, it's suicide. I was like, oh, I don't think it's so, I think it's murder. And then that's kind of where the real book starts. I don't want to tell you too much more. I thought it was interesting. I thought some part of the racial aspects were okay and some parts were not. I did enjoy the mystery element of this. I also really did like the dynamic between all the students, but I also was like, some of those things were racially inappropriate. So you can tell Agatha Christie was not writing in this era, basically. And sometimes I just wonder if Agatha Christie can write proper racial relationships, but I do love her mysteries. So it's just an interesting dynamic of loving this author, but not always loving what she portrays some races or some cultures as stupid in some sense, or not intelligent. And so I think that's a little bit of a rub for me. But I did enjoy this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because of the mystery and all that, but I found some parts were a little, you know? So, yeah. So, Hickory Dickory Dock counted as my my A for Arithmancy, which was to read a book that ends on an even page number. The next book I read had to be a standalone, and that is Kara Isaac's Then There Was You. And I thought this one was super cute. It follows this woman who goes down to Australia just to work for a year. She joins this church, is on the staff, and she's an event organizer, so then she's called on to to arrange and organize the church band's kind of like Hillsong trip, like tour around the world, or at least to the US. So, and New Zealand. So that's what they kind of do. And it's a love, it's a hate to love in some ways, because both the band leader and the girl, I can't remember her name right now because I read it so long ago, they really don't like each other at the forefront. They have things wrong, like prejudices basically against each other in the beginning, and then they're forced to work together. And I thought it was well done. I thought it was a good non-insta love, but it was also enough insta attraction, I think. And then I also really enjoyed how there were some awkward moments, but it felt like it was genuine and someone could have lived that. So I really recommend it. It is a Christian romance if you are into that kind of thing, but I thought it was sweet and wonderful, and I couldn't put it down. I just loved every second of it, and especially when it comes to like the fact that it was centered in a church. Just really was nice to read about, and sometimes the backgrounds of a church setting. So I really enjoyed it. I know it's not for everyone, but if you like that kind of book, pick it up. The next book that I had to read had to be over 350 pages long for residency, and for that one I chose The Great Alone. And this is a used copy as I got it in a gift exchange. So I read all 3 of these books for Used Bookathon, and it was actually really perfect because it pushed these books out of my TBR and done right away, and they were all really good to read back to back since I enjoyed them all. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. I thought this one was so well done. I thought it was amazing to read about and experience. I thought it was impressive. So in this book, it takes place in Alaska basically. And the whole idea is that this girl Lenny and her father and her mother move up to Alaska because her father's been given some money from one of his war buddies from Vietnam War, who actually died in a POW camp, and her father was in a POW camp as well. And so they move up to Alaska to try and get away from the city, and hopefully her dad will feel better. And he's very abusive, and it's very traumatic at times. So if you have abuse triggers, don't pick this up. I felt like it was handled very tastefully and very importantly, but it was not an easy read sometimes. And basically it's about surviving Alaska and her dad. This is The Great Alone is just amazing in the way it's written and the character development. I really enjoyed all of the different aspects of the characters and the different levels. I was frustrated when the abuse was happening and the mom wasn't leaving, but that happens all the time. And it was really sad to read about, but it's also very true of that thing. So I really recommend this. I got an audio and it was also great. I listened to it on my way up to the camping trip that I went this month, and it was very well done. Yeah, I really recommend it if you like historical fiction, which takes place in the 70s and 80s. It was very good. And you can just tell that the turmoil is building in this book. Something's going to happen, and I don't want to tell you what or when, but it's definitely a powerful book. The next prompt that I fulfilled for the NEWTs readathon was for my DA, so Defense Against the Dark Arts class. And so for that first one, for the A, I had to read a book that was Black Under the Dust Jacket. So I read The Bone Collection by Kathy Wright. I think it's Wrights. No. Wright. I'm not having a great day pronouncing or a great week pronouncing words, so we're gonna have fun. And this one it's a novella series, so there's 4 stories in here, and they all take place between certain of her books, so it was interesting to read them. I found like most of them were really well done. I think I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. I rated each story individually, and then I rated the book. So I think I rated it up to a 4. I thought the mystery elements were great. I thought the different sciencey parts were okay. Some parts were like, there's one of the stories had was about python hunting in the Everglades, so don't read it if you live near a swamp. I would be terrified too. And that one was really intense information about boa constrictors, and I was not impressed. Like, I was like, that did not need to be in there. If that needs to be in there, that's okay, but I didn't think it was necessary, all of that information. And then there was one about like up Everest, which was also really cool, and I didn't mind all the sciencey jargon there. You can tell words are a little hard. But yeah, I don't know. It was a 4 because I just thought every story itself was like a 3 or a 4, just depending on the quality of the science stuff, I guess. I think she's a very good writer. I just think it was too sciencey in parts. So the next prompt that I had to read, actually, I also read The Bone Collection for Used Bookathon. And then the next one that I read for this class, I didn't read it right after. I read it actually for Thrillerathon, which took place the 3rd week of the month, and I read it as my oldest thriller on my TBR, my shortest. I also read it because I was thinking about my Thrillerathon TBR, And I was like, what thriller should I read? Because the next prompt was to rethink of the first book that you could remember. And so this was the first thriller I remembered to read on my TBR, and I was like, you know what? I'll count it for both because I cannot think of one off the top of my head. And that one was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Now this one, I really didn't like. I felt like this one was full of angst. And it was like, we're following a serial killer or a killer, and maybe not a serial killer, but a killer who's killed 2 girls, and then it just follows her and her family, Camille and her family, and I was like, this family's awful, and I know that's the point. I know they're awful characters. I know it's meant to be a really bad family, toxic relationship thing, but I really didn't like it. I felt like it was supposed to be a scary thriller, like a killing kind of book, and it wasn't. It was more just like, all these people are awful. Her little sister, I really hated from the get-go. I really hated the mother and the stepfather. I really hated her. I really hated everyone. It's like, that's fine. They're not all meant to be likable, but I just really didn't like it. And I felt like so often the shock value points were meant to be just there for shock value. And I really didn't appreciate that aspect. So I gave it a 1, not reading any more Gillian Flynn. This was like my 3rd chance, basically. I read Gone Girl, thought it was good, but I was like, oh, it's a first novel, so maybe those shock value points are just because she's a first-time author. And then Dark Places I couldn't get through, and now this one, and I'm like, you know what? I'm done. It's apparently her writing style, and it's just not for me. I understand people like it, but it's so not for me, and I didn't like it at all. So yeah, 1 star, but it was the first book I thought of off my TBR, because it is under 300 pages. I finished it, and I was not happy with it, but what can you do? The next NEWTs class that I took was Ancient Runes, which was first one was for an A, to read a book recommended by a friend. So I read The Silent Patient. This one wasn't recommended to me in the typical sense by like a friend or a family member, but it was recommended to me on BookTube. So I counted it and I thought it was like totally applicable. And this one I read for Thriller-thon as well. Now let me tell you, if Sharp Objects was a bad experience, this one was an amazing experience. This one I gave 5 out of 5 stars. It had some of my favorite plot twists. It had some of my favorite characteristics in a book, and I can't even tell you what they are. Just suffice it to say that this personified exactly what I wanted in this book. It's about this woman who is in a psychiatric home because 6 years before she killed her husband with a shotgun 5 times to the face. And this doctor who's going to try and help treat her because he's really fascinated by her story. So it's all about them in this story, but you're also following the doctor and like what his life was like. And I can't tell you anything more. Let's just say, and I'll tell you also that her story is told through diary entries and his story is told through just him living his life. But wow, this is the first novel. I couldn't believe it. This is a debut author. I mean, he's written on like screen projects and stuff, like scripts, but I couldn't believe it. I could not put it down. I was obsessed with this book, and now I want to reread it so I can see if I can catch all the plot twists again, because it was spectacular, and I am definitely in love with this book. I want to read more from Alex Michaelides. Okay, let's try this. Michaelides. I'm gonna say it that way. Michaelides. Alex Michaelides, because I think he would be a new favorite author, or a new auto-buy author at the very least. So if you haven't read this and you love thrillers, check this one out. If not, then just don't read it. But I personally think it was an amazing example of a genre. So then the next one that I had to read for Ancient Runes was to read a book that was written in past tense. And for that one, I read Betsys Wedding, which technically I guess could be my first classic that I'm mentioning in this wrap up. So this was my first classic for Classic-a-thon. And this one was so good. I thought it was so well done, especially with her being getting married and then becoming a married woman and dealing with married life. You also follow Tacy as she's becoming a mom and how she's dealing with that and different things in her life. And then you also see Tib as Tib is trying to find her own path and find love. And so many points in this, I was like, oh, no, no, no. And in the best way, I thought it was great. And then it ended perfectly. I thought it was a great ending to the whole series that's been building up to this. And I just was like, I'm kind of sad now, actually. I'm sad that this is over. This journey of Betsy's is over. I am glad that there are 2 more books written by Mudheart Lovelace about Betsy, in the sense that it's in a spin-off book. But it was so good, and I'm definitely going to miss Betsy in my life. I'm glad I can reread them all the time, and I will definitely say that this one was a 5, and if I could give it a ranking of the series, I'm not sure where I rank them all, but this bind up of Betsy and the Great World and Betsy's Wedding would be at the top of the list, because I loved them both so much. So I really recommend the series, and if you are starting the series and don't know if you want to finish, you should at least try to get to the end, because the end is perfection. The next book that I had to read from my Ancient Runes was to read a book that has been on my TBR for ages. So for that one, I picked the classic I focused on this month was Heidi. I feel like an interesting way about it. I finished it yesterday, which is the 31st yesterday, so today's Sunday, and I don't know. It kind of is hard for me to describe how I feel about this, because I know it's a well-loved classic and I understand why people would love this, but I feel like some parts of it just didn't sit well with me, and especially things like Heidi, who when she's 5, she's brought to her grandfather's house and just dropped off, which is fine. I thought that was well done. And then when she's 8, she's kidnapped. Chapter 5, sorry not to spoil, chapter 5, she's kidnapped. And then it was like, now what? She doesn't fight. She never tries to run away. I don't know. I was like, that part was unrealistic to me. I was like, 8-year-olds don't just go placently into situations. But then also this was just, I thought, really cute. And then everything, I listened to an audio as well to help myself get through it, because it always got stuck in chapter 5 or 6. And so I thought it was good. I gave it a 4 out of 5 star, but I definitely thought it was a little weirdly written in parts, at least about how people would actually behave in those situations. And Peter was kind of annoying. And I know there was supposed to be a redemption arc for him and all those things, but I still didn't really love it. So a 4 out of 5, good classic. I'm glad I finally read it. And it had been on my TBR. Literally, I have owned it for at least a decade, and I'm not sure where I even found it, to be honest anymore. So yeah, I'm glad I read it, and I'm glad it was a good book. So the next class that I was reading for was History of Magic, and the first prompt was to read a book that is a fantasy. And I listened to Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, 5 out of 5 stars. It was wonderful. I really loved it, and I thought it was great. I don't know what else to say. A lot of people know what these books are about, but I just really enjoyed this book, and I've been rereading them, so I thought it was even better still. The next book that I read had to be one with a map in it for History of Magic for my E, and so for that I read Summer of Blood by Dan Jones. Now Summer of Blood takes place, and it kind of just covers in total what happens during the Peasant Revolt of 1381, which is a summer, it was in June basically, this whole event took place. And Dan Jones really covers it entirely. He talks about how how it started up, and then how the lords contributed to it, and then how the peasants decided to revolt. And then it follows the peasants' revolt as they go from town to town to town, finally getting to London, and what happens with government, and especially with the king at that time. I thought it was very well written. I really did enjoy it. I felt like some parts of it were over gory, if that makes sense, because it was very detailed, and it is about a lot of people dying. But it was extremely gory in some places, but it was also other places was just okay enough gory. But yeah, if you are looking for a great history book, a great book about Britain's history as specifically as like that kind of thing, the first revolt of its kind, go check out Dan Stevens' The Peasants' Revolt, because I thought it was really well done. I just didn't like the amount of gore that always came through. And I can handle a lot of gore, but that was a lot. So that's my only warning for you. I also gave that one 4 out of 5 stars for that reason alone. So now I'm going to jump into the books for people that or for classes that I don't need for my career. And for my career, I needed only those 10 owls, so I am going, or 10 newts, so I am officially a Hogwarts professor and a librarian, which I think is super fun. So for the other potential newts, I keep calling them owls, the potential newts that I got, the first one was The Daughter of Sherlock Holmes by Leonard Goldstein, and that was for Charms, which was to read a book with a beautiful cover, so A in Charms. And this one I thought was really cute. It's a really great retelling of Sherlock. I liked the mystery element. I loved knowing who, but not why. And then I also really just loved the characters. I did feel like sometimes it was a bit stilted relationshiply because the whole book follows John Watson, and then John Watson's son, so John Watson Jr., so they call him Watson and they call Dad Watson and him John. And then Sherlock Holmes' daughter, who is named Joanna, and that's literally on the back cover, so I'm sorry if I'm spoiling anything for you. So Joanna and John have this kind of romantic potential relationship, and it's a little stilted, but I chalked it up to the time, so I enjoyed it. I also really think it was great the way the different mystery elements came about and the different pieces of information were revealed. So I really enjoyed it. I really recommend if you're looking for another Sherlock inspired book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and it is a series, so I will be continuing on with book number 2 eventually whenever I can find it from my library. The next book that I read was for Muggle Studies, for an A in Muggle Studies, which had a picture element or a photograph element on the cover. And so for that one I read The Secret Lives of Sergeant John Wilson by Lois Semi. Now this one is about, it's a nonfiction true crime about Saskatchewan, Canada, and about the different events that took place in the life of John Wilson. So it starts off with John Wilson. He's Scottish, he's from Scotland, and he can't find work there, and the war's coming, and so he decides to move to Canada to try and get a job to support his wife and 2 children back home. So that's where the book takes place, or sets off. He goes off to Saskatchewan, and then he doesn't have a wife there anymore, and he tells everyone he's not married, and if they feel like, no, you're married, then he's like, oh, my wife died, or we're divorced, and he never tells them that he's actually married. And then he meets this young girl, and he wants to marry her. She's like 19, and fresh and springy as a daisy kind of thing, and he wants to marry her, and so meanwhile, his wife is getting worried for him, and comes to Canada to find him. And that's where things happen. So this book really follows what he does with this, and he does murder his wife and in order to marry the other wife. Also, it follows like all of the different proceedings after her body's found and all the different testimonies. It was very well done. I felt like it wasn't amazing, but it was really good. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And if you're wanting to know about Canadian history, true crime, nonfiction, all those kind of things, I would check this book out. It's not very popular, but I thought it was well worth the read. So the next book that I read was actually for divination, and that was acceptable was to read a book with a white cover. So I read The Tent by Margaret Atwood. And this is a collection of essays, probably, not really short stories. And it was good. It wasn't awful. There were some stories that was like, I don't understand what you're getting at. And then other stories I was like, that's really powerful. And just like, I don't have a great relationship with Margaret Atwood, and I was being pushed into reading a BC author for a bingo card for my local library, and I couldn't find a local author aside from Margaret Atwood. So I picked up her shortest book, which is The Tent, and I read it. And afterwards I'm like, well, my relationship with Margaret Atwood hasn't been worsened, but also wasn't extremely bettered. I am a little more inclined to try Margaret Atwood, but not for a long time, and it'd have to be the right book, I think. But yeah, I thought it was good, not great, but not bad, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I read was actually for Muggle Studies again, for my E, and that was to read a book that takes place in the real world, basically. And so I read The Sunday Philosophy Club by Alexander McCall Smith, and this one, it was good. It was not what I expected, to be honest. It was a lot of philosophy, and I know that's in the title, you should expect that, but I didn't, because I read book 2, which is Friends, Lovers, Chocolate, for a previous book challenge, like earlier this year, back in April or something. And so when I was reading this one, I was like, oh, it's going to be very similar. And in some ways, it was. But it's categorized as a mystery. And what happens is, Isabel, the woman who's never told us what her age is, but she's around 40, just in her early 40s. She is at the opera, I believe, and then someone falls off the top balcony, dies, and everyone's like, it's suicide. She's like, no, it's murder. And that's kind of where the whole mystery part takes off. And it's nowhere near as interesting as it sounds. She does do a bit of digging and a bit of plotting into this, but it's a lot more like philosophy and right versus wrong and morality and like all these things, and it was a 3 out of 5 for me. Now I'll tell you this, if I had started with that book, I would not be continuing in the series. But because I started with book number 2 and I'm really intrigued, I want to follow up on those characters, I will continue with the series. So if you've started with that one and you don't want to continue, give book 2 a shot, and if you don't like it, that's fine, but give it a shot at the very least, because I feel like book 2 was way better. So I gave this one a 3 out of 5, but if I'm probably being honest, it's less than a 3, but I don't give half stars, so it's a 3. So the next book that I read was for potions. The A in potions was to read a friend's favorite book. Now I know I'm stretching this one a little bit, and by a little bit I mean a lot, because I know that this is not my friend's favorite book, but I know her favorite series, or one of her favorite series, so I'm counting it because there's nothing else, or just doesn't fit, and it's fine. But I've been reading The Sea of Monsters by Rick Riordan for the last couple months with my cousins Megan and Sarah, and Sarah loves the Percy Jackson series. So I'm counting it, even though she doesn't really love this book. She doesn't really like this book, but that's okay. I am going to count it as a favorite series, we'll say. And this one follows Percy as he's going through his next adventure to find the fleece, the golden fleece. And it was very, very cute. I really enjoy the whole mythology aspect, and I love all of that kind of turning mythology into our present times. So I'm just a mythology junkie, to be honest. So it's been a great series for me to read, and we are already started on book 3, and we will continue from that. And when we're done, because we like to take our time, I'll let you guys know when we finish it, but I enjoyed this one. So those are the 15 books that I read this month. I thought it was a good reading month, and I am very proud to say that I completed Classics-a-thon with 2 books, and I completed, actually 3, because I also read a collection of poetry, which I forgot to tell you about. A collection of poetry, which was 47 Celtic poets, I believe. And it was good. It was an audiobook, and it was done in the accent and everything, and it was just something to help me go to sleep when I was camping. So if you like poetry, Celtic poetry, check it out. I thought it was okay. It was a 3 for me. But yes, so actually those are all the books that I read this month. So I'm not sure if that's 15 or 16 now, but either way, I enjoyed myself with reading this month. I had a lot of great new books and a couple duds, but you know what? What can you do? So that is my wrap up. I hope you guys had a lot of fun watching this, and I hope you guys had a lot of fun with NEWTs this year. I would love to hear down below what you guys read, and if you participated in NEWTs, what career you guys got or were trying to achieve, because some of them were really crazy hard with the amount of books you had to read. Like The Alchemist was over the top crazy with how many books you had to read. So I would love to hear what you guys accomplished and what you read last month, along with the classics that you read this month, because I will update you on this. I tried reading Vanity Fair this month, and I am halfway through, but I had to put it down for Thriller-a-thon, for other things, and with a lot of family visiting, my reading time was cut short. So because of that, I am not done Vanity Fair, but I will continue in it because I am really enjoying it. But I did read Heidi, the Celtic Poets, and Betsys Wedding, all for Classics-a-thon, and I thought they were spectacular to read. So I will see you all next time. Bye.